Record. Okay, so good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining me tonight. My name is Yanni. If this is the first time you are joining our program, and I am the DeKalb Extension Ag Agent. And today, let's talk about herb gardening. And now, here is the outline of my talk today. So the first part, you will gain a very general understanding of the herb plants, like as a plant group. Then we will talk about some cultural practice, how you can grow herbs successfully. All these strategies, they are applicable to all herb plants. And the next part, we will go over some popular herbs as you type in the chat box, like your favorite herb plants, some special notes, how you can take care of them. And the last part, we will talk a little bit about how you should harvest them and preserve them. First thing first, before you plant like anything, you want to make sure you understand the life cycle of the plant. Because I have one friend, she's kind of like the beginner to the gardening. And once she go to the garden center, she will see these sections like annual plants, perennial plants, and she didn't fully understand what does that mean. And also, if you got my handout, I send out to you with the Zoom link. There is one like herb planting chart with herb name, and like when you should sow them and propagation method, all that kind of things. You can find a letter A, B, or P just right behind the herb name. So these three letters refers to the herb life cycle. The annual herb include basil plant, borage, cilantro, dill, and like most of our vegetable crops, also annual plants. So if you grow herb plants come from the annual category, you want to replant them every year or every growing season, because the annual plants, they will, from the seed germination, they develop foliage, flower, and then they will produce the offspring, they die. All this process happen in 1 year. So if you have the annual herbs, you have to replant them every growing season. And the biannual plants is kind of like the similar things as your annual herbs, like parsley, calloway. They finish their life cycle within 2 growing seasons. So the first growing season, they develop their foliage. The second growing season, they flower, develop seeds, and die. So for herbs, all of us just kind of like use parsley's foliage. We don't really eat its flowers or we use its flowers. So we basically just treat the biannual plants as annual herbs. And the last category is perennial plants. So most of our herbs actually come from this category. Example, mint, rosemary, lavender, sage, oregano. So for the perennial herbs, most of the time I would recommend you should start them from a seedlings or a cutting. So like if you want to grow a mint or a rosemary, I recommend you just go to a garden center and buy one established seedlings as your like as a beginning stage. And for your annual herbs, you can easily start them from seed. And the second thing to help you understand the herb plants a little bit is most of our herb plants actually come from 2 plant families. This plant family, you can just think it as like a unit. We organize all our plants. And if plants come from the same plant family, they kind of like share some characteristics. So for the mint family, we have basil, mint, thyme, oregano, rosemary, sage. So plants from mint family, most of the plants, they have some tolerance of excessive heat and dry soil. So, I mean, sometimes once they established, they can tolerate that drought condition. And we have another plant family is carrot family. So the carrot family, we have parsley, dill, fennel, cilantro. So in the carrot family, most of the plants, they have a very strong taproot. Think about carrot. So like a lot of carrot relatives have that like strong taproot. So what happens to, why do we care about this is if you want to plant a herb from the carrot family, you do not want to disrupt their root system that much because they do not enjoy that. So if you want to plant a parsley or cilantro or dill, you probably want to sow that seed directly in your garden. So you don't need to transplant them and to disrupt their root system. Another thing about carrot family is the swallowtail butterfly larvae actually they feed on the carrot family plants. So sometimes you may see some defoliation on your parsleys or like on your fennel plants. That's because the butterfly larvae actually needs that food to for their growth. So that's kind of like our first part to give you some general understanding of like all herb plants. And the next, let's talk about how to grow herbs. If you want to grow herbs in raised bed, I assume you will have different types of herbs instead of like you said, like Yanni, I want to grow a whole raised bed of basil plants. You must like basil a lot if you need that many basil plants. So most of the time, if you grow herbs in a raised bed, you probably have several species. So you want to like arrange your herbs according to their height. So like the highest plant and the medium height and the short plant, they kind of like arrange according to their height. So first of all, the higher plant went shade out the shorter plants. And second of all, like your landscape design is just kind of like more in order if you arrange them that way, and it wouldn't be that messy. And for the raised bed, the soil test would be your best reference. If you want to know how many limestone and fertilizer you should apply into your garden bed. But I will kind of like also give you some like general standard later in this talk to cover like how you should fertilize your herbs. And the last thing, if you want to grow your herbs in the raised bed, is always avoid growing some invasive herbs in your garden bed. Example, mint, lemon balm can be invasive, bee balm can be invasive, and sometimes some varieties of oreganos can also be invasive. So if you have them in the raised bed, probably do not plant this type of invasive herbs in the raised bed. So the most popular options growing herb is probably in the container, or we say the container garden, because like normally we only need several herb plants and it can feed us like the whole summer or like whole spring. So for the container, choose a container for growing herbs. First, your container must have a drainage hole on the bottom, because drainage is kind of like a very important factors for growing herbs. The material of your container, I would say it doesn't matter, because normally if we grow herbs in a container, we have the potting mix. So the drainage won't be a big issue in this like very well amended potting mix. However, some people, they kind of like very heavy handed, like they always like over water their plants. So if you are that type of person, probably you should choose a clay pot. Except for these factors, your container should be big enough so the plant have enough space to grow out. The general rule of thumb, the depth of your container should be at least 1/3 of the final height of your herb plants. So for example, if you want to grow a basil plant, and on the plant tag, it says the final height would be 24 inches. So according to this final height, your container should be at least 8-inch deep. And for each herb plant, we want them to have 1 gallon potting mix. So if you go to the garden center, they will have this 3-gallon or 4-gallon pot. For a 3-gallon pot, you probably can grow like 3 herb plants in that container. The advantage of like growing herb in a container probably is like we can be very flexible. We can put that container wherever we want to grow herbs. And some people, they do enjoy growing herbs indoor. So if you grow herbs indoor, the biggest challenge would be the light condition, because the indoor light condition is less intensive as it is outdoors. So what you can do is you can introduce a growing light with a LED bulb or a fluorescent bulb. For a long term, the LED bulb is more cost effective. So just go to Amazon and search for growing light, get one growing light, and then place that growing light 6 to 12 inch above your herb plants. And then you want to supplement this growing light the same time as plant receive the natural sunlight, and turn on your growing light 12 to 14 hours per day. There is another thing I noticed from my personal experience is there is a tiny little difference between the general potting mix and the indoor potting mix. So if you want to grow herbs indoor, choose the indoor potting mix because they do not have that like undecomposed organic matter, and you will have less problem for fungus gnats. So if you ever had this fungus gnats problem, you will understand how annoying they are. They kind of like very tiny, and if you have the light condition, they just kind of like fly in front of your eyes. So now if I grow something indoor, I always go for the indoor potting mix. Here are some like growing conditions required by most of our herb plants. First thing, they need at least 6 hours direct sunlight for optimal growth. For the soil pH, most herbs, they require neutral pH. So 6 to 7 should be good for them. Lavender and rosemary, these two plants, they enjoy more alkaline soil, and their ideal soil pH would be 7.5. So in our southern area, our southern soil, if you want to grow lavender and rosemary, you want to apply 1 to 2 pounds of limestone per 100 square foot for them to grow well there. Fertilizer wise, I mean, if you already have like a raised bed, you grow crops there for several seasons, I would recommend you to do a soil test. Because some things in your soil mix can change. But they say if this is your first year in your raised bed, you just kind of like amended the soil with some part of like compost, some part of the topsoil. Your soil mix should be pH neutral and like nutrition neutral. Here is a standard for you to apply fertilizer to your herb plants. Herb plants are moderate feeders, so they need 2 applications of fertilizer per growing season. The first application should be made before you either like sow the seeds in the ground, or you plant your seedlings in the garden. So that should be your first application. 1 pound of 10-10-10 slow release fertilizer per 100 square foot, and then you can make another 1 pound 10-10-10 in the mid-season. For basil, parsley, and chives, these 3 herbs, sometimes we just harvest them very heavily. So if you do have plants like you harvest them very heavily during their growing season, you probably want to add 1 extra fertilizer application to them. And if you say like, oh, Yani, these 10-10-10 fertilizer tend to be very specific, but I do not have this ratio fertilizer at home. I have a different ratio. So if you have like another type of fertilizer at home, you can go to the UGA fertilizer calculator to transfer this rate to whatever fertilizer you have at home. And for water your herb plants, they only need moderate amount of water. So that doesn't mean every time if you water your herb plants, you just kind of like wet the soil surface. If you water your herb plants, you still want to water them thoroughly. But then you can wait until they dry out to re-water them. And if you grow your herb plants in containers, you just want to fertilize them by using the liquid soluble fertilizer every 2 to 3 weeks, according to how often you harvest your herbs. As one thing I like herb is kind of like herb has less pest and disease problem compared with other landscape plants, but you do still have some pest insects in your on your herb plants. Aphids, spider mites, white flies. Spider mites normally is very common if we have the dry and hot weather. So if you have these three type of like insects bothering your herb plants, since you just have a home garden, you know, we want to eat the very safe and healthy. We want to eat these safe, healthy plants. So just use a strong spray of water to wash them away. It should be enough to control them. As a long-term management for the pest would be follow the recommended spacing distance, so the plant will have good air circulation. And there is another pest probably on your carrot family plants, as I mentioned, is swallowtail butterfly caterpillar. They really enjoy feeding on the parsley, dill, or fennel, this group of plants. So most people, what they do, if you say like your parsleys start to defoliate, what you want to do is probably you want to have two plants. One plant is for swallowtail butterfly and one plant is for yourself. So anytime if you find this fat caterpillar feeding on your own herb plant, you can relocate them to this one host plants you grow for them. And if you say like, oh, I really don't care about this swallowtail butterfly, I just want to get rid of it, you can apply the BT powder on your herb plants. That is what we use to control the caterpillar. For the disease, we may have this, the powdery mildew can be problematic on lemon balm, basil, yarrow, if we have like this hot and humid weather. And then we probably will have this rust. Rust is kind of like showing up this rusty brown on the foliage, and some branches may have the dieback. So this kind of disease is kind of like the common disease you may see on the herb I listed here. The cultural practice you can use to control disease would be, first of all, if you see there is one infected branches, you want to do a thinning cut on that branches. So instead of just do a haircut, you know, cut that part, you want to find where that branch is come from and cut it off from where it originates from. And then if they have plant growing around them, you want to prune them back. So by doing this pruning, you can improve the air movement around the plant. So that's kind of like the long-term ways to control diseases. But if the fungal disease is really go more serious on your herb plants, you can use some organic fungicide like copper sulfur spray. So the next part, we will go over some popular herbs as we grow in our daily life. The most popular herb has to be basil. If you go to garden center, we kind of like, they offer different kind or different varieties of basil. So I use Thai basil a lot because Thai basil is used for a lot of Asian dishes. And then we have this purple raffle basil. You can use it as a tender annual like ornamental plants. It's kind of like adds this color interest in your garden design. Or I see some people, they use this purple basil to make herbal vinegar. So it adds this rose coloration like for your vinegar. And then the most popular, most used one would be the sweet basil. So basil is a tender annual plant. What does that mean is you have to wait like until we don't have that danger of frost and you want to plant them. So you want to plant basil the same time as you plant your tomato and pepper. It can start from seed directly, or you can buy seedlings from a garden center and just transplant it. It's like full sun condition, well-drained soil. And the next thing is, if you have a basil plant and your plant have like a very long leader stem, this stem is just kind of like very long with very little lateral branches. What you want to do is you want to pinch back this main stem. What does pinch back mean? Is basically remove your top 2 or 3 sets of the foliage. However, I know most of you know how to, like, you should pinch back your plants, but I think some people, they just do the pinch back too much, and then the basil plant cannot respond to this kind of practice. Every time, if you either prune your plants or if you pinch back your plants, the general rule of thumb is you should not remove more than 1/3 of your plants. So the plant have energies to produce can produce more growth, they can get bushier and healthier. But if you overdo this pinch or pruning, they may not bounce back. And for annual herbs, once they start flowering, they almost can like reach the end of their life cycle. So what we want to do is we want to delay their flowering. So every time if you see your basil starts to develop their flower head, you want to remove it to delay their flowering. Basil tastes best when it's fresh, but if you want to preserve it, their flavor preserve best if you freeze them in the oil. Several basil recipes I really like. The first one must be the Taiwanese chicken popcorn. I'm not sure if you ever tried it. It's kind of like a little bit different from our daily fried chicken, because they will actually fry the whole basil plant, not like the basil plant, but the basil foliage and also the stem in the oil. So it just add a very different and interesting flavor to that fried chicken. So next time if you do your own fried chicken, try to add some basil in your hot oil. And the next recipe probably is kind of like a very interesting one. I had one basil smoothie from a coffee shop, and I feel surprised. It actually tastes very good. So you probably can try the basil smoothie as well. I have this post-program survey to look at what kind of topics you are interested about. So once I read your suggestions, a lot of people, they are interested about this companion planting idea. So companion planting is a concept where like we want to build a very good plant community. We plant different plants together, and they serve as a community. They promote and enhance each other's growth. So companion planting is a very good concept for gardening, but currently it is not proven by any like university research. All the information I include in my talk today, I found this information from one Cornell extension publication. I think I also share that with you. If you are very interested about companion planting, I really encourage you to test all this combination out, because some of them is very interesting. If I don't read them, like I don't read their name together, I will never think about like grow these plants together. So for the companion plants for basil would be pepper and tomato. So probably you can add 1 or 2 basil plants in one raised bed where you have your tomato and your pepper plant. So the next herb is my favorite, cilantro. Cilantro refers to the foliage as a herb, and coriander refers to the seeds as a spice. Cilantro is a hardy annual, so you can plant it much earlier than you plant your basil. If you want to know when you should plant which herb, you can refer to the herb planting chart I shared with you. So for cilantro, it belongs to the carrot family. So they do have a strong taproot, and and they don't transplant very well because some people, they can control themselves, don't bother the root system. But at transplanting stage, sometimes you have to like disrupting their root system. So just kind of like, you want a happy plants growing over there. You want to directly sow in the seeds in your garden. So I found this, so I learned this from some smart gardeners. So they basically, if you can see my video here, so in my hand, I actually have just kind of like a water bottle, and I just cut it on the both end. So it's kind of like have an open end for both sides. And a lot of gardeners actually use this water bottle planter to help them sowing the seeds directly on the raised bed. Because if you directly sowing your seeds like on your raised bed, you still have to follow that spacing distance between your plants. And also you have to thinning your seedlings once the seed start to germinate. So what they do is they will place this planter in a row, and they will space them out according to the recommended spacing distance between plants. And then they will sow in like probably 2 to 3 seeds, the center of this planter. When the seedlings come out, this planter will help you easily identify which one is your weed and which one is your seedlings. And then you just use a pair of scissors to snip off any extra seedlings over there. One single spot, you only need one plant, because if you have too much plants, they will compete with each other. Since cilantro is a hardy annual, the challenge you grow them in Georgia is once the temperature goes up, they will bolt into flower very quick. And as mentioned, if they flower, their flavor change. So instead of sowing or plant your cilantro at the same time, you should give them a 10 days to 2 weeks time interval. So you will have a continuous harvest along this growing season. And the companion planting for cilantro would be anise. The next plant is parsley. Personally, I'm not a big fan of parsley. The only time I bought it was like first I came to the United States. I'm not very familiar with all herb names. So I went to the grocery store, and I think this flat foliage parsley is very similar as cilantro. So I got it. But the flavor is so strong, and I don't know how to use it in my dishes. So according to others' feedback, the flat foliage parsleys is better for cooking. I mean, you can give me your feedback as well, but I never use parsley, so I don't know if I can trust this feedback. But for the curd leaf parsleys, people also use it a lot as ornamental plants. Because like in like late fall, early winter, if you see this container garden, normally the plant we can use for the winter container garden, the plant material is very limited. For flowers, normally we only have this one type of flower, pansies, right? Because they are hardy annuals. They can flower, they can withstand our winter frost. But if you only have pansy in that container, it can be very boring. So some people, they will add this curd parsley in that container design to add some foliage interest. Parsleys, usually, you want to directly sow in the seeds on your raised bed, but it's kind of like sometimes can be difficult to germinate. So what you can do is before you're sowing your seed, you can soak the seed in the hot water for 24 hours. And then dry them on a paper towel and seed them like in your garden. That will help to stimulate their seed germination. And within the carrot plant family, they require sturdy moisture for continuous growth. So the next herb, I like chives a lot, and it's kind of like very easy to grow. If you kind of like chop their foliage, you will smell this like onion smell. For the chives, it's you can either start it from seed, or if you already have like a chive plant, or if you have a friend, your friend have a chive plant, you can easily propagate the chive by like divide them. So how can you do that? Is you can like dig the circle around these chive plants. You want to leave some distance away from your plants so you don't hurt their root system, and you want to loosen the soil around them, and then gently lift them up. You will have this plant clump with like the foliage and their root system. For the chive plants, when you watch them carefully, at the base of their stem, very close to their root system, they have this like very small bulb, like a small bulb. We call it bulblets. For each plant section, you want to make sure you should have at least 10 bulblets as your like new plant. You can like divide them up to several pieces, but each piece should have at least 10 bulblets. And then you can use this one piece to restart a new plant. So chives, normally we harvest them like very regularly. So you want to add like one extra 1 pound 10 10 10 along the growing season. And their flower is also edible. You can add it to your salad. For chives, there is one potential problem of chives is if you don't harvest their flower, when the flower kind of like expands, they will develop seeds, and they can self-seed very well, which means once they develop seed, the seed drops to the ground, and it will become a new plant, which this plant become a little bit aggressive. So if you don't want your chive plants to expand in that area like too aggressively, what you can do is before like when you have this flower, you just deadheading them, either use them in your salad or just kind of like throw them away. So the next herb is oregano. We have several kinds of oreganos on the market. The Greek oregano, I think, is priced for its kind of like flavor, and people use it a lot for cooking meat. For the oregano, normally, actually, the flavor of oregano tastes stronger or better if you dried them and then you use them. So the leaves of culinary oregano are slightly fuzzy, and they have either pink or white flowers. And then we have this another different variety called the golden oregano. So golden oregano now used a lot also in the ornamental side. So people use it as a ground cover. So the golden oregano actually spreads less vigorously than other oregano species, because oregano, they have these horizontal runners. The term we call it rhizomes. So these runners will help them spreading out horizontally, which make it a little bit aggressive. So the companion plant for oregano would be pumpkin. I mean, if I don't read this information, I will never think about this combination by myself. So the next one would be mint. So mint is a very popular plant. We have so many different species, and I think the market is having more and more some like new mint. Before I grow my own mint plant, I am not a big fan of mint. I remember once I went to Pennsylvania, one of my friends bought me 1 cup of mint ice cream. She said it's good. So as a friend, I do not want to be very rude. So I ate it. But like every bite of that ice cream remind me of my toothpaste. And I don't like that synthetic mint flavor, they add to the different product until I have my own. I finished the fresh foliage from my spearmint plant and I added to my tea. And it's so fresh and it's so different. So I think that's kind of like some magic. You grow your own herbs, you're growing like your own food, because nothing tastes better than the fresh produce. The most common one is spearmint and peppermint. So spearmint have this fruity flavor. So people use it a lot for drinks, cocktails, teas. And peppermint is spicier because it has higher content of menthol. So we also use it a lot for medicinal use. Mint, they don't come true from seeds, or if you ever tried to grow mint from seeds, you may figure out it take you forever for them to germinate, or they may just not come out. So if you want to grow mint, just go to a garden center or go to your friend house, get like a seedlings and start from there. For the mint, like different from other relatives like rosemary or oregano, mint requires, or like they enjoy moist soil. So once the top inch of the potting mix is dry, you want to water them. And if you have a location in your yard where it can receive the morning sun, afternoon shade, that's a very ideal place for your mint to happily grow there. And all of us should know mint is very invasive once they get used to like the environment they grow. So you do not want to have mint on the ground or in the raised bed. I don't want to tell you like you have to install a 10-inch to 12-inch deep root barrier for them. Don't waste your efforts. Just have your mint plant in the container. It will save you a lot of efforts to do other things. So next one, I think I see from the chat box, rosemary is kind of like one of your favorite herbs. There are two important factors to successfully grow your rosemary. So the first thing, rosemary enjoy more alkaline soil. So always make sure your soil pH is correct. It's near like 7.5. So the rosemary will like that pH. And second thing is rosemary enjoy or like or require well-drained soil. A lot of people, like if they want to grow rosemary on ground, but they do not have a very good drainage in their yard, what they do is they actually mound it up. So they basically kind of like create an artificial slope to improve the drainage for rosemary plants. So once you meet this requirement and your rosemary seedlings established in your landscape, they are quite drought tolerant. So the only issue may bother them is probably spider mites once the weather get very hot and very dry. For companion plant for rosemary would be bean. The next plant I want to cover is sage, but I'm not talking about the original sage plant because I'm not a big fan of that. And even though sage plant is perennial plant, it's supposed to survive for 5 to 7 years. Most of the perennial plants can survive 5 to 7 years in Georgia area. But in some years they just react as an annual plant, so they only survive for like one growing season and they died. But I really like this one variety of sage, pineapple sage. So this plant, the foliage have a very strong pineapple scent. What I use is when the leaf is kind of like before flower, I collect the fresh foliage and I just add it to my tea. It's kind of like, it tastes very good. And then during late summer, this plant will produce these pretty red flowers. And this flower is actually very attractive for hummingbird and butterflies. It blooms right at the time where hummingbird hatchlings So a lot of people actually just have this pineapple sage in their landscape to attract pollinators. So for this plant, same thing as you do for other herbs. You want to pinch it back regularly so you can increase the lateral branches, the plant can get bushier, and you can encourage more new growth happen on this plant. So for this kind of like this is kind of like the session we talk about the popular herb plants. And I want to talk a little bit about how to prune your perennial herb plants. So example would be rosemary, oregano, thyme, lavender. So this group of perennial plants, if you ever had this group of plants, you will know as they grow up, they will get woodier, and the base of their stem actually becomes this brown dry wood, and the top of their stem is kind of like the green stem, but the base of their stem actually is the dry wood. So every time when you harvest your herbs, you basically like harvest the tip of your stem. That's kind of like we can consider it as a pruning. But sometimes we need like prune our plants, to promote new growth so your plants can get bushier. But sometimes people cut it too much. So when you prune your perennial herbs, you do not want to prune them back to this bottom dry wood area, because if you cut them down to this dry wood area, there is no new growth can coming out from that dry wood, and that one branches is actually died. So every time you prune, just prune about, leave 1 to 2 inch on that green stem on your plant. And each time when, as I mentioned, if you prune any type of your plants, do not prune too hard. Probably as a start, you want to prune like 1/3 of your plant and wait until this part of your plant develops the new buds, and then you can transfer to the another part. And for lavenders, I would say you probably want to prune your lavenders right after the flowers. And for other herbs, as long as you prune them the month before the first frost, it should be good. So the last part would be use herbs, like how to harvest herbs and how can we preserve them. So here is a question for you. When do you think is the best time to harvest herbs from garden? Early in the morning, early in the afternoon, or early in the evening? You can type your answer in the chat box. Yep. So actually the right answer is early in the morning, because within the herb plants, they have this essential oil. So the concentration of essential oil actually is highest when the plant is cool. So let's see, I have 2 minutes. I think didn't work. Okay. So the best time to harvest your herb is actually early in the morning. Oh, I really need to mute this one person. Wait 1 second. Oh. Okay. Oh God, I cannot mute this person. Okay. Sorry for that. Okay, so the best time to harvest your herb should be early in the morning, when the plant is still cool. And the next thing, like when you want to massively collect some like stems from your herbs, you want to do that before they flower. So the flavor of your herbs would be the best. When you harvest your herb, put them in a plastic bag and store them in the fridge, and only wash them before you want to use it, so they can store in that way longer. The most common way to preserve herbs must be just drying them. When you can you harvest the major stem of your herbs, you can just dry them. The common herbs we use the drying method would be rosemary, thyme, oregano, sage, because it can preserve their flavor very well. You want to tie their stems together and then hang them upside down. You want to have a paper bag around them to avoid the dust in that area. Then just find a dark, dry, well ventilated location. Wait 2 to 3 weeks should be enough for the foliage to dry, and then you can strip and store the foliage in a mason jar. But we do have some herb plants. They do preserve their flavor better if you freeze them either in oil or in the cold water. Example, basil, cilantro, and chives, fennels. First thing you want to do is you just kind of like chop them, and then you add oil to your herb plants, and you can like make this herbal mixture until it has like a smooth paste texture. And then you just add this herbal mixture into your ice tube tray. I use stir fry to cook a lot of my food, so I basically just throw one oil tube into my pan, and I can fix my food like that. Some herbs you can also freeze them in cold water. Same concept as you freeze them in the oil. I see some people also said if you want to freeze them in the oil, for the strong flavored herbs, you want to use strong flavored oil. So if you have a strong flavor like rosemary or oregano, you want to use a strong flavor oil like olive oil. So that's kind of like the talk I have today. If you want to learn more about herbs for your future reference, here are several resources you can check out. So first thing first, UGA extension. We do have a lot of publications. You know, it's very suitable for Georgia area because sometimes for gardening, you cannot just borrow some information from Minnesota state because some things may differ from here to there. And herbgardening.com and the Herb Society of America. I think that's all I have today. And now I can take care of your questions.